fact that many impulses appear almost from the beginning in contrasting pairs. This is a remarkable state of affairs called the ambivalence of feeling, and is quite unknown to the layman. This feeling is best observed and grasped through the fact that intense love and intense hate occur so frequently in the same person. Psychoanalysis goes further and states that the two contrasting feelings, not infrequently, take the same person as their object. What we call the character of a person does not really emerge until the fate of all these impulses has been settled, and character, as we all know, is very inadequately defined in terms of either good or evil. Man is seldom entirely good or evil. He is good on the whole in one respect, and evil in another, or good under certain conditions, and decidedly evil under others. It is interesting to learn that the earlier infantile existence of intense bad impulses is often the necessary condition of being good in later life. The most pronounced childish egotists may become the most helpful and self-sacrificing citizens. The majority of idealists, humanitarians, and protectors of animals have developed from little sadists and animal tormentors. The transformation of evil impulses is the result of two factors operating in the same sense, one inwardly and the other outwardly. The inner factor consists in influencing the evil or selfish impulses through erotic elements, the love needs of man interpreted in the widest sense. The addition of erotic components transforms selfish impulses into social impulses. We learn to value being loved as an advantage for the sake of which we can renounce other advantages. The outer factor is the source of education, which represents the demands of the civilized environment and which is then continued through the direct influence of the cultural milieu. Civilization is based upon the renunciation of impulse gratification, and in turn demands the same renunciation of impulses from every newcomer. During the individual's life, a constant change takes place from outer to inner compulsion. The influences of civilization work through the erotic components to bring about the transformation of more and more of the selfish tendencies into altruistic and social tendencies. We may, indeed, assume that the inner compulsion which makes itself felt in the development of man was originally, that is, in the history of mankind, a purely external compulsion. Today, people bring along a certain tendency, disposition, to transform the egotistic into social impulses as a part of their hereditary organization, which then responds to further slight incentives to complete the transformation. A part of this transformation of impulse must also be made during life. In this way, the individual man is not only under the influence of his own contemporary cultural milieu, but is also subject to the influences of his ancestral civilization. If we call a person's individual capacity for transforming his egotistical impulses under the influence of love his cultural adaptability, we can say that this consists of two parts, one congenital and the other acquired, and we may add that the relation of these two to each other and to the untransformed part of the emotional life is a very variable one. In general, we are inclined to rate the congenital part too highly, and are also in danger of overvaluing the whole cultural adaptability in its relation to that part of the impulse life which has remained primitive. That is, we are misled into judging people to be better than they really are. For there is another factor which clouds our judgment, and falsifies the result in favor of what we are judging. We are, of course, in no position to observe the impulses of another person. We deduce them from his actions and his conduct, which we trace back to motives springing from his emotional life. In a number of cases, such a conclusion is necessarily incorrect. The same actions which are good in the civilized sense may sometimes originate in noble motives, and sometimes not. Students of the theory of ethics call only those acts good which are the expression of good impulses, and refuse to acknowledge others as such. But society is on the whole guided by practical aims, and does not bother about this distinction. It is satisfied if a man adapts his conduct and his actions to the precepts of civilization, and asks little about his motives. We have heard that the outer compulsion which education and environment exercise upon a man brings about a further transformation of his impulse life for the good, the change from egotism to altruism. But this is not the necessary or regular effect of the outer compulsion. Education and environment have not only love premiums to offer, but work with profit premiums of another sort, namely, rewards and punishments. They can therefore bring it about that a person subject to their influence decides in favor of good conduct in the civilized sense, without any ennobling of impulse, or change from egotistic into altruistic inclinations. On the whole, the consequence remains the same. Only special circumstances will reveal whether the one person is always good because his impulses compel him to be so, while another person is good only in so far as this civilized behavior is of advantage to his selfish purposes. But our superficial knowledge of the individual gives us no means of distinguishing the two cases, and we shall certainly be misled by our optimism into greater overestimating the number of people who have been transformed by civilization. Civilized society, which demands good conduct and does not bother about the impulse on which it is based, has thus won over a great many people to civilized obedience, who do not thereby follow their own natures. Encouraged by this success, society has permitted itself to be misled into putting the ethical demands as high as possible, thereby forcing its members to move still further from their emotional dispositions. A continual emotional suppression is imposed upon them, the strain of which is indicated by the appearance of the most remarkable reactions and compensations. In the field of sexuality, where such suppression is most difficult to carry out, it results in reactions known as neurotic ailments. In other fields, the pressure of civilization shows no pathological results, but manifests itself in distorted characters and in the constant readiness of the inhibited impulses to enforce their gratification at any fitting opportunity. Anyone thus forced to react continually to precepts that are not the expressions of his impulses lives, psychologically speaking, above his means, and may be objectively described as a hypocrite, whether he is clearly conscious of this difference or not. It is undeniable that our contemporary civilization favors this sort of hypocrisy to an extraordinary extent. One might even venture to assert that it is built upon such a hypocrisy, and would have to undergo extensive changes if man were to undertake to live according to the psychological truth. There are, therefore, more civilized hypocrites than truly cultured persons, and one can even discuss the question whether a certain amount of civilized hypocrisy is not indispensable to maintain civilization, because the already organized cultural adaptability of the man of today would perhaps not suffice for the task of living according to the truth. On the other hand,